This is the Rising Tide Startups podcast, where we chat with startup founders from all over the globe to help you escape the cubicle and begin your own startup journey. Make sure you take notes. Every episode of Rising Tide Startups is sponsored by Podbrand Media. Let Podbrand create and host your company branded podcast. Learn more at podbrandmedia.com. This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and I have a very special guest today in a very uncertain time, but Aviv Ben-Yosef. Aviv, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
So we've had an opportunity to chat a little bit before we hit the big red record button, but Aviv, if you and I just met, cold and in a networking event, how would you introduce yourself to me?
Well, mostly nowadays what I do is I help tech executives lead teams they're proud of leading. And that's like my calling, helping create these teams that are our career highlights.
And family?
Well, family, we can get into that. Of course. Well, I'm from Israel. I have 3 kids and my lovely wife. And when it comes to, in general, I'm a geek. I taught myself to code ever since I was like 9 years old. I've always been enamored with technology, so my life keeps being about it, even if I no longer write a bunch of code for a living. And when it comes to hobbies, nowadays it's mostly chess, even though I suck and kids beat me all the time, and learning Italian.
Learning, it's all right. Well, you
Yeah.
kind of have that look about you. You could grow the mustache out a little bit and use your hands more when you talk. You could maybe
Yeah.
pull that off for sure. But yes, I am curious. So, obviously, probably from a young age, you were into tech. But you mentioned off camera, you talked a little bit about, you also did this, when you had military service as well. So walk through you. So before you answer that question, I do ask a pre-interview question for the guests to fill out, and it just says, what's one surprising thing that people don't know about or whatever. And Aviv, do you remember what you put on that survey that I sent you
I'm
before?
unsure. Is it related to Iranian servers?
Exactly. You wanna,
Okay.
yeah, this is the most unique response I've ever had in 5.5 years of doing this podcast. So please let our listeners know what is the unique thing about you.
Yeah. Okay. So as I said, I was a geek ever since I was young, and around junior high, I decided that I didn't just want to learn how to code. I wanted to get into hacking because it looked cool, honestly. So I kept learning and doing stuff, but I came to a point where, there's only so much you can learn just in theory. I wanted to do stuff in practice. But I was also a good little kid, so I'm not gonna do anything that's gonna, end up with me being in jail or anything. So I was thinking and thinking, and th again, this is the thinking of someone who's like 15 years old or something. But like, okay, I'm in Israel. I'm pretty sure if hack anything in Iran, no one's gonna extradite me over there. So that's a good, legit target. So what I ended up doing is, just for practice, I would look up servers there, .gov.ir as an Iranian government service, and just practice over there. And the second I hacked those and got access, I didn't do anything. I can't read Farsi, so I even if I wanted to, I couldn't do anything useful with it. But once I got access, I just let them be. But that's what I did. And funny story, when you get, there's compulsory service at 18 in Israel. And as part of my all sorts of interviews to decide where you're going to go, I ended up going to the Israeli equivalent of the NSA. And as part of the whole classification service process, they asked you, did you commit any digital crimes? And I'm like, oh.
Define crime. That's
Yeah.
right.
I'm like, I'm going to end up, being a real soldier on the border or something like that. And I tell them what I just told you. And the soldier who was doing this just looked at me, didn't even flinch. She's like, yeah, okay, sure. She just reaches for a folder, gives me a ready set form for this. So I just sign this that you're not going to do it again. I'm like, oh, okay, so you're used to this, I'm guessing. And I just signed it and that's it. And turns out, they're looking for these kids to
Hmm.
just get them enlisted to where they want to. So I'm guessing I get lucky.
So isn't it a little scary how easy it was for you to get inside, though? I mean, just
Oh yeah, but
I mean,
we're talking like almost 20 years ago or something like
yeah,
that. I think that things have improved.
they're a little more sophisticated now, I would imagine. That's right. On the Iranian side, they were probably scrambling over there, going, "Somebody is hacking into our servers."
From Israel, yeah.
From Israel. That's exactly right. So set the alarms off, for
Yeah,
sure. But
we're lucky. I didn't, start any diplomatic incident without knowing. Yeah.
I did enjoy that line you said. I didn't think I was going to get extradited. Yeah, I think the chance of extradition is probably pretty low in that
Yeah.
direction. But anyway, man, I could chase that rabbit a lot. But I'm here to talk about your business. So walk us through kind of your business journey. Your just briefly touch on like employment history, like post service.
hmm Yeah, sure. So I served in the army for about 4 years. Then I went and worked at IBM because I had a bunch of friends there in a startup that was just recently acquired, and they told me, no, no, it's a startup. Come join us. It was IBM. Okay, it's like they didn't notice because it's like the frog boiling, but for someone who joined, I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
this is IBM. So I left and I joined as a first employee of a startup, a fintech startup here that was a bunch of fun, and I worked there for a few years. Ended up getting acquired and really was like an amazing school for me. I learned so much about software engineering and stuff like that. And just about when my wife got pregnant for the first time, I decided that if I'm ever going to do something that's not just being a for hire, an employee
Hmm.
engineer, that was a good time. So I started with a few years where I was a freelance coder, and I worked with a bunch of amazing startups, mainly here in Israel. Many of them now are, acquired, IPO'd, unicorns, and I learned a lot, provided a bunch of impact. It was really, I get hooked on the impact. As someone who really enjoys coding, I think it's related to what I did in the army. I didn't ever cared too much about technology being too cool. I really cared about what I was enabling with that code
Hmm.
I was creating.
Kind of the end product,
And
yeah.
exactly. And helping so many companies and seeing how I'm helping them close sales faster, grow faster, get these wins. I just get hooked on that. And that's what I was doing for a few years. And then with time, I started noticing that because I'm talking to all of these startups and I'm seeing how they work, instead of getting the same pattern matching capabilities a good engineer coder has for spotting bugs in code really fast, I started getting those for organizations. And I noticed that the hallway conversations I was having with founders, with executives, were providing them sometimes even more value than my
Hmm.
hourly coding work. And that kicked me off on this tangent that eventually turned into what I'm doing now full time, which is coaching, advising tech executives, mostly CTOs, but also CEOs, CPOs nowadays, helping them personally, executive coaching and helping them grow. I always say you have to grow faster than your organization. And also when it comes to creating these amazing teams that don't get slower with time or as they grow, but actually become something again you're proud
Hmm.
of leading. Because life's too short to lead an average team.
I've interviewed a lot of people, more than 300, startup founders, and some of those consultants, some of them authors, some coaches, in that span. But I really think this may be the first time that I've seen such a stark transition from, there's the tech, so there's kind of the left brain and the right brain, the tech versus creative almost. It looks
hmm
like to me that you started out obviously on the left side of the brain, and somehow you figured out how, just almost accidentally, became right brained, in that as well, where you could relate to, C-suite, and be able to coach them strategically and relationally, not just
Yeah.
technically. So what happened? I mean, that is such a rare combination, of skills. So what is there something you can look back even at your childhood you can think, I was the kid that got picked on the playground and I encouraged my friends that didn't have anybody that sat with them at the lunch table. What I mean, I want to dive really deep in here.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there because to me, it felt like a surprise. As I was going into it, I kept being surprised because ever since I was, a nerdy teenager, I kept telling myself, I'm the introvert. I just give me my tasks, let me do the
Leave me
code. I'm
alone.
gonna
Yep.
get there. Exactly. But I like when I became this freelancer and I started talking to a bunch of people that I knew. And many people, especially here, in Israel, we have such an amazing hub of startups.
For
And
sure.
I've got, so, I can throw a rock without hitting a founder. Um, so I have so many friends who ended up being early employees in startups or being founders. And I started talking to a lot of them because I was considering, should I just become a CTO and start something? What should I do? What's like my unique advantage? And so many of them said, you're an amazing coder, but you also have this capability of being very good when it comes to listening to people and seeing what's lying under the surface or helping a few people who don't agree come to terms or notice when people have this communication gap. And then, I started looking back and realizing that this is something that I'm doing,
Hmm.
unawares even, at family dinners. Not because I always try and make peace, but because maybe like a good engineer, I'm never married to a certain, technology or approach. And I'm also usually that I don't have strongly held opinions. I can live with a bunch of dissonance and also realize that the
Hmm.
world is gray. And that's when I realized that maybe this sort of thing is very useful when it comes to helping bridge the gap between the tech part of a business and the business part of the business. And this is mainly what I leveraged. Like for the first couple of years, I kept saying that I'm a bridge, or someone called me a zipper. I helped bring together
So
those different
that's
parts of the
interesting
company.
description. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now here's a quick word from one of our new sponsors on Rising Tide Startups.
Have you been wanting to start a podcast but not sure where to start? Well, now you can start a podcast in less than 24 hours. I'm David Ezel, and I'll walk you through all of the things that you need to get started today. Things like how to choose the right microphone, how to edit your audio, and how to find guests and build a pipeline of future guests. This course does a great job of keeping things high level while also diving into the things that keep most people from starting. Even better, if you use the code RISING at checkout, you'll get 20% off your purchase. But that's only if you use the code RISING at checkout. What are you waiting for? Start your podcast today.
I'm okay with you being a bridge. What I don't want you to do is design the bridge because it's not okay to live in the gray and the distance. I mean, yeah, we got to be spot on those measurements. There's no
Yeah.
allowances or deviances. Your deviations we can allow. But um, I think the one thing that is unique about what you said just a second ago, and I think is so applicable to so many people that are sitting in the cube and they're thinking, okay, I got to do something. I'm going crazy. I feel like I'm in a jail cell, here instead of a job. But the idea that you listened to people and they confirmed or affirmed, your skill set, they affirmed what you were good at, what they came to you for I think is really important. And at what point did that light bulb kind of come on in your mind that said, hey, I've heard this like 5 times in a row now. What maybe I need to start listening to this. Maybe I need to kind of do a little transition, a little slide, a little pivot.
Well, it started exactly as I said when I started having these hallway conversation with founders. And again, my mindset was I'm a really good engineer, and I was paid a lot, like really a lot, by startups to help them solve things fast. But in my mind, I'm like, they only need me because I make the keyboard go clickety clack really
Hmm.
good. But I noticed that these founders who are very busy, have a lot of stuff, sometimes they were just approaching me to ask things, and I saw that they really valued my opinion. And other times, for example, one time we worked at a startup where we executed a brilliant technological achievement, did something that was amazing, huge technological shift from one sort of framework to the other, millions of users, no one even noticed it. Amazing, amazing, amazing. When later on, when we celebrated and I was talking to the founders, they said, "Oh, this took 2 months longer just because we want to have no effects in user and preserve the history entirely." I'm like, "Yeah, exactly." And they're like, "Oh, if you had told us that, we would have skipped that, put a blog post saying you're going to lose your history in a week and that's it and save 2 months."
Yep.
And I was a guard. The CDO I was working with, who told me what to do, he never even thought about that. And for me, that was one of the biggest, light
Hmm.
bulb moments, because I'm like, oh, there's a lot of value in someone who can see that, doing things
Hmm.
right in air quotes when it comes to the technological solution doesn't necessarily mean doing what the business really values.
Mm.
And that set me off on that trajectory. The hallway conversations, along with moments like those where I noticed that, oh, us being amazing technologists sometimes even made it was sometimes to our detriment, because maybe a different team that wasn't as good, they would have said it's going to take us 10 months. Someone would have asked why, and then, oh, okay, so then do it. But because we could have done things relatively fast,
Hmm.
we still ended up doing things that weren't needed.
Hmm.
And I love coding, but I hate code. I always say that the best code I ever write is the code I never write. And I try to delete code more than code that I
Hmm.
write whenever I started working with a new company. So all that together fit with, I need to help companies change things. That's one. And another thing, and this relates again to my army. I don't want to go, too nostalgic, so feel free to just shoot me down if it's too long. But when I enlisted, I'm like 18 and a half. We're a bunch of kids. None of us have real world experience. But something that's unique about the Israeli army is that you have this notion of reservists. Essentially, you can call up anyone who used to be on the team
Hmm.
like 10, 15 years ago, and ask them to come and work with you side by side for a few days. And they, at wartime they have to, and at peace times they don't have to, but like 90% of the cases they're going to come. And we had those, and person after person would tell me, "Oh, you don't even understand how lucky you are. You're never going to work with a team that's as good as right now." And they were saying it as if it was a good thing. But for me, I was listening, I'm like, "Are you saying that this is it? Like
This
I'm
is as
18
good
and
as it gets.
yeah, exactly. I'm 18 and it's just downhill." And for me, that was always on my mind. And that was why I went after the army to work with in a team in IBM that's mainly people from my unit. That's why I went to be the founding engineer at a startup that was a bunch of people from my unit. Um, but because I had this fear, but then eventually I realized, no, it doesn't have to be like that. We can do that. Yeah, we're not going to have the same tasks that you have when every system that you work on can help for the security of your state. Okay. But still, you can do things that matter, that you're proud of, and have an amazing team around you. And again, this boils on, as I said when we started, right? I want to help you lead a team you're proud of leading. I want to create these teams so you don't just look back to when you were 18, but we can create something that every day is still the pinnacle of your career. So that's what I'm aiming for, and all this like sort of culminated together about 5 years ago.
So have you transitioned completely to my full-time gig is just coaching C-suite on how to lead teams well?
Yeah. About 5 years ago, I completed the transition. Maybe 4 years ago, a bit before COVID, essentially. And I was lucky because that set me off on a trajectory that was lucky back then, because during COVID, it somehow became a lot easier to do this with a bunch of people abroad. Before that, people
Hmm.
wanted to
Yeah.
work with coaches and consultants that could
On
pop
site.
in the
Right.
office. Exactly. But then it got unlocked, and I'm so happy because I get to work with people all over the world. Clients in Greece, in Spain, and in the States, and everywhere. It's so much fun, and I really enjoy that. And I actually used COVID because I spared so much commuting, and wrote my first book, and that really helped me complete the transition and really work with people globally.
Hmm. And is it primarily tech teams, like tech startups or tech companies that you're consulting with?
Yeah, yeah. I would say 95% of the companies I work with their tech teams, the R&D teams, helping them. Sometimes I do help like bigger companies where we're talking about organizational development in general, or sometimes I work with product teams or research teams. But most of what I do is aimed at making this product engineering beast that's usually the biggest part of startups and a big chunk of their budget, making this thing a lean, mean value shipping machine.
Hmm. And not just the product, the team that's building the product. How can they work
Yeah,
well together? How can they I mean it is interesting. Are you familiar with the book Strength Finders?
I don't think so.
So there's a book that's been, that's primarily in the US, probably business scene, but for a long time, that where you take this pretty long like self-evaluation exam, and it kicks out like your top five, strengths, characteristics, that based on this survey. And it would be really interesting for you to take that exam, and the machine would probably blow up trying to evaluate, it's like, this is such an anomaly, of answers here. We don't know what to do with it. It's going to twist its little mechanical brain in knots. But it would be interesting to take that and see what your top five, strengths it would call that, it would say out of 35 qualities or whatever, it would evaluate that. But I'm interested to hear when you first made this transition. It's easy to evaluate, like, we need a coder. This is the task. This is how much the market is to pay this out here. Everybody sees the need. There's no learning curve.
Mhm.
There's no, I mean, we got to do it. Just like we got to have doors on the building to be able to lock. But
Yeah.
I can help your team be more efficient. I can help your team be more productive. I can help you work better together. That seems a little more ethereal. Was there a little bit of a learning curve or a education curve that you had to take people through? Were they a little less, a little reticent to just dive in and say, let's go for it? What were some of those early
Yeah.
conversations?
Well, it was unusual, even for me. Like I had to see that I can actually do this, and I got help. Like I got for years I've been working with a coach and mentor called Alan Weiss from the States.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it took me a while to find a way of doing this that actually worked out for me and worked out for my clients. And in the beginning, I actually was lucky because a lot of the people I knew and past clients actually trusted me to do this before I trusted myself. And that's how I initially started and got those first few wins that
Mm-hmm.
were then, what I used to get the
Yeah.
next ones.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, but I still, sometimes people ask me, what's your metric of success? And it's so hard because when you work with startups,
Mm-hmm.
and or let's say you're a CEO that I'm coming to help with, usually you either have like 10 different fires to put out, or even if we decide on something specific within a month, you can't even remember what we talked about a month
Mm-hmm.
ago. You have a new thing going on. So setting up a goal usually didn't hold up. And what I ended up doing is that, like 99% of the cases, I work with someone in increments of 1 quarter. And I say, as a business, as a whole, my indication that what I'm doing is good is that in general, people tend to renew more than 1 quarter. That means that even after they paid and they saw what I can help them with, they decide, okay, I want more of that. It's no longer just how good am I at marketing. They saw it and decided to do it again. And I can say that, to this day, I have I'm guessing only a handful of people who only did it for 1 quarter and then stopped. And
Mm-hmm.
mostly people just renew. I have clients and have been working with me for over 2 years in a row now.
Mm.
And that's a lot of fun because it just shows you that they're getting their value.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's interesting when I ask that question, I always have a conversation going on in my brain at the same time, thinking about the next
Yeah.
question. But the idea that, I doubt that I was thinking to myself, I said, I doubt that he just went cold turkey and started email blasting his friends saying, hey, I've got a new service. I mean, probably your first clients were people that reached out to you and said, hey, can you help us with, ABC type things. So it is interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, I think one of the key metrics of, our key performance indicators for you would be just testimonials, just outcomes. I mean, you talked about that's what you care about, and it's not
Yeah.
the code's not the issue. It's that what does the code do? And the outcome would be like if you worked with teams, they say, hey, we can quantify what happened. We can say we think that's a 20% improvement or, we delivered 6 months early or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of that is just like, kind of almost anecdotal that says, you know what, we're just better. We are a better team. People enjoy their work more. They're more efficient. They're more productive. They are our turnover has decreased. Our retention of key employees has improved. All those little, side metrics that we're kind of looking at, I think, would be, gold, for,
Yeah.
previous clients to kind of outline for future clients, because that's who I want to hear from. I want to hear from somebody you worked with that is really happy. That's not your brother-in-law, that
Exactly.
it's not
Yeah, no,
blood
I
relation.
get you. I keep saying that for me, first of all, there's the instant gratification. Like I worked with a startup and like within 2 months, I just happened to be in the office and heard the VP of product saying, to the team, I don't think that you realize, but we're now delivering like 3, 4 times faster than we used to.
Mm,
And this was, partially because of what we were doing and helping them move
mm-hmm.
so much faster. Or the VP that told me, at the end of the year, we know that we got things 2 months earlier than we expected. We saved 2 months of R&D, and R&D is hundreds of thousands of dollars a
Yeah.
month. And I'm like, yeah, that's always fun. So for me, that's
You
always the
said I got
first
to raise
win.
my prices.
Yeah, I'm like, do tell the CEO. But also, what I also like is that I have this sort of a growing portfolio of startups that I worked with, that I helped.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much fun, getting a random text from someone I worked with like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and they're like, I just wanted to let you know that we're still um, reaping the benefits of what we did back
Mm-hmm.
then, or a picture of someone who used to be more junior when I was there, and like he's now a manager, and we're doing it based on your advice way back then. So those sorts of things
Yeah.
are just so fulfilling because you feel like I didn't just gave them a bunch of nice fish,
Mm-hmm.
but they are now capable of doing things on their own and adjusting to their situation, etc. That's the aim eventually.
And when they run into the next, skill they want to master other than fishing, they're going to remember, what you did for
Yeah.
them, and they're going to call you again. But man, I could sit here and just continue to ask you questions all day, but I know you got clients to consult and to coach, so I want to let you get back to work. But I would love for you to just to kind of wrap up today, just like what are one or two really critical issues that you think are key for leading teams well, or what's kind of generic across industry, across verticals. So, just say these are things that anybody that's trying to lead a team or trying to lead an organization or whatever, just keep these in mind because they are just foundational truths.
Yeah. So what I see and like the things I keep preaching about is first of all, you have to think bottom line, you have to think value. With engineers, with salespeople, with marketing people, it doesn't matter. No one cares how hard you work. No one
Mm-hmm.
cares, how many hours. we care about results. And I keep telling my clients, if they could replace you with GPT, they would have, because no one pays just to have engineers going, look at it on the keyboard. They want the results of that code. So that's that. Always keep that in mind. They're going to be replaced by AI eventually. Second, always consider that if you're working with creative people, you have to create room for them to be creative. I see companies, paying fortunes to engineers, brilliant engineers. They worked so hard to bring in just those precious few. And then what do they end up doing? They make them slaves for the task manager, whatever Jira, whatever tells them to do today. And they never think. They have a hackathon once a year. And no, create space for creativity. This is one of the things that make the Israeli army so effective. The recent crisis aside, so effective when it comes to doing a lot with almost nothing compared to the States, for example, because we are thrifty, because we use constraints to create more creativity, and because anyone can speak up. You've heard the word chutzpah, maybe. Anyone can say that's a bad idea, or I've got a better idea, and let's try my approach. There's no authority. The commander said that we've got to do that. And I always try and create those pockets of creativity and innovation, because those, the companies I worked with that had this are those that when the AI wave started a year ago, they were already ready for it. Or the companies where engineering isn't just a tool for creating more features, but for creating small superpowers for anyone else in the company, helping all of your colleagues. And this really compounds with time. So those are like the things that I keep preaching for, because it just works. If you have that, you're going to see a bunch of value. People are going to, keep saying that was the best manager I ever had. Just make that happen, and you're going to see magic.
Those are such, they're fairly generic in reach, but they are really broad. There's broad impact in both of those. I mean, look what Google does, give you a day a week to work on something that's not your job type thing. There's a method to that madness. There's a reason that they do that. And just the whole idea, I love the way you've kind of wrapped us up today. And there's just so much here, and we're going to have to schedule a 2.0 version of the podcast to come back and ask you more questions to allow you to actually do your job. But Aviv, I just really appreciate you taking time today just to share your story, and in the midst of, like we said at the very beginning, very difficult times, and just stay safe. And thank you again for just playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Aviv, have a great day.
You too, Kevin. Thanks.
I hope you heard some great takeaways from our guests today. Make sure you reach out to them, and thank you again for playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide.